Welcome back to the book club. Today's video is going to be a book discussion about Stephen Erickson's Gardens of the Moon, book one of Malazan, Book of the Fallen. I will have recently just published my book review of this book, which is a spoiler free, just my rating of various categories of the book and thoughts about things, very high level and not spoilery at all. This video is going to be more in depth and also contain a lot of spoilers. So if you haven't actually read the book or you're not interested in hearing about spoilers ahead of reading the book, you should probably stop watching now because I'm going to be getting right into various questions and and all of that that I have about the book. So to kick things off, I wrote basically just a bunch of bullet points of things that I wanted to talk about. And I probably haven't written everything down that I would like to talk about, but it's kind of getting dark outside and I can keep writing forever. And I don't want this video to be too terribly long. So I'm going to go with what I have now and maybe we'll ad hoc add some new things within there. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to talk about from this book was what I wrote down was Warrens, Wizards, and More. So I think that what interests me a lot about the fantasy genre in general is magic systems and how the magic systems work. Um, in when books don't have any magic in them at all, I'm usually disappointed. Not always, but usually disappointed. So authors like Brandon Sanderson that often have like very straightforward rules based magic systems appeal to me a lot, but also just deep, complicated, and confusing magic systems also appeal to me. And I think this book kind of nails that. Um, it's very clear to me that there is a lot going on in the magical realm that's not explained in this book. And I think further future books are going to explain this more. Um, but for example, like what the various warrens are and how they work is all very amorphous. It's not exactly clear how they work. In the back of the book, actually, there's a list of the paths or something they're called, but the warrens that are like the non-elder warrens, things like Denol, that's the warren of healing and like that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure that most of those names aren't even mentioned in this book at all. So clearly all of those things are planned out in future books, but at the time of reading this book you don't even touch most of those warrens. You hear about the healing warren a bit and a couple others, and then also we start to learn about some of the elder warrens like Kurald, Ghislaine, uh Omtos, Philak, and Telan. Those are three that I remember being mentioned. I don't remember if I don't know if I'm saying those correctly at all, but those three were mentioned and are sort of related to the elder races that we learn about. But the way that these warrens work in general and how they're connected is confusing. Hairlock throughout the book, before like blowing himself up or whatever, was going through the Warren of Chaos to access other Warrens. So it's clear to me at least that there's like pathways in between the Warrens, and whether that's just the Warren of Chaos that, maybe it's like some blob universe where all the Warrens are like little planets and the Warren of Chaos is like the space in between them that you can travel, or maybe there's like direct bridges between them. I'm not really sure yet. I don't think that there's anything that I recall reading this book that really says like you can get from Warren A to Warren B, but not from B to C or something along those lines. But I'm very interested in learning more about that. I have started reading the second book um, in this series, Dead House Gates. So I do know a little bit more about Warrens than when I initially read this book, but um, so I am pretty confident that that's going to be expanded upon going forward, and that's very interesting to me. Another thing that I just wrote down because I thought was interesting is in the very beginning of this book, there's a bunch of talk about wax witches. Um, the old lady who I now don't remember her name, she's the seer of something or seer blah, who saves or protects Sari's mind from being completely, taken over by Cotillion. In the very beginning of the book, it's mentioned that she's a wax witch, and also in the Malaz city mouse quarter. In the prologue, there's like the rooting out of mages. We learn later that Tattersail was part of those mages that was rooting out the mouse of wax witches. And when I first started reading this book, I thought that wax witches were going to be mentioned more often. and they kind of never were. All that I understand about them is that there's like witches that use magic through candles in some way. Like, I don't know if it's some sort of like necromancy or whatever. I think it was mentioned offhand that this seer had like her husband and her sons like trapped in candles or something. I don't know. I thought that was going to be a bigger thing, and like maybe there'd be some sort of like wax witch magic that we would learn about, but we kind of didn't. So I don't really know how these like different brands of magic that aren't maybe aren't directly related to Warren's works. Also, interestingly, in the second book in Deadhouse Gates, there's like another um, this isn't really a spoiler, so I'm going to mention it anyways. There are people that are called there's like a Wiccan tribe, and they have their own warlocks, which are maybe using warrens and maybe not. I don't really know. So there is still a lot more to this magic system that I clearly don't understand, and maybe some of it's just because I'm dense, and maybe some of it's because it's like literally not explained in this book. But that kind of thing does interest me, and it like, despite not knowing all these answers, I want to know more. So that was like that stuff was all really cool to read about. Um, Next up here, I want to talk about the Malazan characters. So I think that the Bridge Burners, Whiskey Jack and Kalam and Quick Ben, are all very awesome, very cool. I want to learn more about them. You do in book two, there is more about at least one of the characters so far, at least. So I'm very happy about that. I think that there's a lot to like the Whiskey Jack, or I guess the Bridge Burners in the Seven Cities, their previous campaign. That's still um, unclear. They keep mentioning that like things happen in the Seven Cities, and that's like, eventually they turned against the Empire, or they didn't side with Lysine when she took over the Empire, and they were with the old Emperor and all that stuff. I'm very curious to learn more about that. Um, and also like Whiskey Jack's relationship with Dujek One Arm. They clearly like go way back, and Whiskey Jack got demoted from being, I don't remember the military ranks. Like, I don't remember if he's a captain now and used to be a lieutenant or the other way around. He used to be a higher rank and now he is a lower rank, and Piran is like a higher rank than him. Um, because like the Empire doesn't like him and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of information there that I'm interested in learning more about. The Bridge Burners, I think, are a very cool group that have a lot of interesting, backstory and all of that. Piran is one of the main characters, I guess. There's so many main characters, it's hard to say, but Piran is like part of the prologue. He's one of the earlier characters that you follow. So like in my mind, at least, he's one of the one of the lead guys, and I think that he was probably the least interesting Malazan person. Um, I do think that he had like a neat little arc where he was with Lorne, and then some stuff happened in Pale, and then he was against Lorne, and he like joined up with the Bridge Burners, and that was all. That was all fun. He had a weird relationship with Tattersail, um, and he definitely grew as a character quite a bit. But at the same time, he's just like kind of a young guy who's doesn't really know what he's doing. So unlike the bridge burners who clearly have a lot of experience, he's just kind of like there and following, like walking around, and um I don't know, for some reason he gets like super obsessed with Tattersail. They hook up once and then he's suddenly like, "Oh my god, I have to avenge her," which to me seems a little forced. Maybe upon rereading, if I ever get to that point, it'll make a little bit more sense to me, but where I'm at now, at least, I feel like the Paran Tattersail hookup and him, finding her dead and being sad about it makes sense. But then him like finding out that she's still alive and being like, you know what, after this, at the very end of the book, he's like thinking about how after this holy war thing's over and blah blah blah, I need to go back and find Tattersail, who's reborn as like a 5-year old somehow. Um, Maybe she's gonna rapidly age, which will make it more appropriate of a relationship, but it felt weird that he was like, so at the end of the book he was still like thinking about Tattersail, because kind of all that happened was they spent a week or two together in Pale after he saved her life because of um I'm now forgetting the name of the like twin jesters. Oh, Opan, which plays like a huge role in the book. But like because of Opan, he was able to kill one of the hounds and save Tattersail, and like, I don't know, for some reason he fell in love with her. It's kind of weird. Um, but Yeah, so I think that like Piran had an interesting plot. I didn't like totally hate it, but he was not my favorite of the Malazan characters. I think Tattersail's like small arc was interesting. I definitely was disappointed that she died so early because I wanted to learn more about her, and I'm glad that she was magically reborn, and I hope that we get to see more of her in the future. Um, because like the I don't know, the like sacrifice that she made in her whole like rebirth being seen through like Kroop's prophecy, or not prophecy, but his like weird dream prophecy thing. Um, that was like a really interesting scene, but then you never see Tattersail again. So I want to know more about that. And then I guess the last Malazan character that I actually remember to write down, and maybe I'm forgetting some, but um, Lorne, Adjunct and Lorne is obviously another huge character, and I think that I had questions early on at how she did her job at all because mages seem so powerful in this world, but then you learn about how she has an Otatarl sword, um, which and the Otatarl ore or whatever it is, like rock or it's some substance that repels magic, and it's like so OP that she just like can absorb magic and mages can't hurt her. Um, so that did answer a lot of questions that I had about like how she even was able to do her job as like this anti mage when magic seems so powerful that a normal person just wouldn't be able to do anything. But apparently, there actually are ways for normal people to do stuff. And the Otatarl sword is the reason. And that also sort of um, played into something that happened during the climax with the thief character, or I guess the assassin guy. I forget his name now. Not Crocus, but the other one, who like had the Otatarl dust that he used to win his like duel at the end. So this substance did play a role. It also does play a role in book two, in the beginning at least. So I'm interested to learn more about like that part of the world too, how there is like actually ways to counteract magic despite how powerful it is. Um, and then so the next point I wrote down was actually about the Tattersail Paran adjunct Lorne love triangle. It wasn't really a love triangle. There was like an offhand comment that Lorne made as she was almost dead at the very end of the book, saying how she was, how like Paran was attractive or something. And that actually made me confused for a bit. But then I actually realized the entire time I was reading, in my mind, Adjunct Lorne was like an older woman, like she was in her 40s or something because of her status, probably. But I should have pieced together earlier, but I didn't. That she was a child when Tattersail assisted the cleansing of the mouse quarter, and she was Lauren was in the mouse quarter with her family as a child then, and that was only 9 years ago. So that means that Lauren is like in her early 20s and is probably about the same age as Paran, because in the prologue Paran was 13, I think. So at the end of the book, that means Pran's 22. Lorne was probably around that age as well, which like put things into perspective for me. Um, but also like makes me very curious how somebody who's only in her early 20s became the adjunct to the Empress and was, a very she seemed like the Empress's like right hand person. So I'm curious about that. I don't know if we're ever going to learn more because Lorne, kind of died in the end. So I don't know if we're going to learn more about how Lorne ever, rose to power at all, because she was just like a poor um, girl who was living in caves while her family died, after the mages like destroyed the mouse quarter, and then she suddenly, I don't know, got a magic sword or an anti magic sword and like helped the Empire. So there's some questions that I have still there about how exactly she managed to do that. Um, and I don't know if maybe I just missed it or if it's going to come up in the future, but I guess I'm kind of interested in that. Next up, the Darujistan characters. I think that sorry, overall there's a few exceptions. So I think Kroop and Circle Breaker were two interesting characters from Darujistan, and the rest of them were kind of weak, in my opinion, at least. Actually, no. So I guess I should add the other mage. I forget his name now. It started with a B, like Baruch or something like that. He was also an interesting guy. Krupp and Baruch were interesting because they were mages and they had interesting abilities. Like Baruch was talking with Animander Rake and the crone, like that great raven. And so like he was a part of some interesting plot part points. Krupp had his like crazy prophecy dreams, which I think was very cool. And he was very clearly playing off um he was like pretending to be a crazy guy when in reality he had his wits about him and was just playing other people like a fiddle. So I thought that was really interesting to see like what he was thinking, but then also what he was doing and saying. He would just like say crazy things so that Crocus, for example, thought that he was just a crazy old man when in reality he was just like Krupp was manipulating Crocus in some way because Crocus was the coin bearer and he needed to like protect him and all of that. Um, but I thought that Crocus and the assassin and the other guy who was like the playboy character. I don't even remember his name. I thought they were kind of just there to be there. Like I still think Crocus's love side story was a bit frivolous. The fact that he, stole jewels from some noble lady's room and then he returned them later and then finally at right before the climax he sees her again and he's like, "Oh my god, hey." And she's like, "Who are you? You're not the guy that I'm here for." And he's all hurt. Like it's just kind of like a weird silly teenage side story that it sort of just amounted to nobles suck and that's it. I guess like if I had to describe why that happened, it was probably to give Crocus a motivation to leave with the bridge burners and Sari, who got renamed at the end of the book to like Apsalar or something. Um, because if he didn't like learn some lesson about how nobles suck and how he doesn't actually want to like become a noble one day, then I don't know, maybe he should have stayed in Darujistan. So that whole side story could have just been a way to give motivation for Crocus to leave. But I don't know, it felt like it was too much for no payoff at all. Like I would have also just believed it if Crocus wanted to leave because he was like just a thief and a nobody. Um, so overall the Darujistan characters were a lot more polarizing, I think. All right, so the next group of characters I want to talk to are Animander Rake and company. So Animander Rake is a very, very stereotypical badass evil guy, which I think is great. I like badass evil guys. And I feel like it's kind of rare that you actually hear from the badass uh, evil guy directly. Like reading chapters of Animander Rake having conversations with other people is very interesting because he's like portrayed as this badass evil guy, but also it's not really clear that what he's doing is evil. He's not human. He's Teist Andy, and he's like lived for hundreds or thousands of years, and he can turn into a dragon, and all this stuff is awesome. Um, and he also like doesn't have that much concern for the humans, but also still interjects in some ways. So I think his character is a little bit more complex than just like badass evil guy, but he does play the badass evil guy really well. He has like a really cool sword. I don't remember the name of the sword anymore, but like that seems like it's going to play a role in future books. I have to imagine. Um, like every time they said the name of his sword and like described it, I was super hyped. So I think that like everything about the moon spawn and Animander Rake and like I don't know, the dragons that live there and all that stuff, the other ties to Andy, I think that stuff's all really cool and I can't wait to like, or I guess I'm hopeful that I can read more about that. I hope that that's the case at least. um it seemed like the chained god and all this stuff was like related to Animander Rake's sword and would come up later. The other part of Animander Rake's crew is Kaladin Brood, who we read about but never directly. We don't really see that much of him. It's just like he's fighting a war off in the north, and it seems like they're in dire straits, kind of, but also Kaladin Brood. There's like hints that Kaladin Brood's like really the guy who's the super strong one. I think that he's supposed to be a human, but he's also like lived for a long time. and I think it's Crone is who mentions that like Brood is her real master, and she just like is kind of spying on Animator Rake. So I think like there seems to be something interesting there. I don't know if I was reading too much into it or was like misunderstanding some of the passages, but it seems like there's some stuff between Kaladin Brood and Animator Rake where they're not just like directly allies. There may be some weird stuff in between, but I'm still curious what's going on with Brood and like where his war goes. Um, there is like uh, a Kaladin Brood versus the Malazan Empire versus Dujak One Arm um, thing that is probably going to happen now that this book is over um, because Brood is still in taking back space from the Malazan Empire on Genabakis or Genabakis, and the Malazans are kind of split now that Dujek One Arm is like, screw you guys. So I hope that we're going to read more about Brood. I don't know if we're going to read more about him directly or indirectly based on just like reading about things that had happened on this continent in future books, but I think there's some more stuff going on there. And like their crew, like Animander's crew of Teist Andy soldiers that did play a role in like part of the climax of this book are pretty cool as well. Um, so the next thing I want to talk about is the deck of dragons and prophecies in general. I think that from the beginning of this book, it's just full of prophecies, which I think is very cool. The way that this book does foreshadowing in a lot of ways is by throwing a prophecy at you, and you're almost hopeless on first glance at being able to understand what the prophecy means. But a few chapters later, the prophecy actually starts to make sense. I'm not confident that I would understand all the prophecies that happened, but there are various scenes with the deck of dragons where there's readings that happen, and those things are foreshadowing events that are going to happen in the future. And some of those events do actually happen in the future, and maybe all of them do in this book, but I don't think that's the case, at least. But there's like foreshadowing between High House Dark and High House Shadow, for example, and that conflict does actually happen in the climax of the book, where at the very end, Rake basically tells Cotillion to like f off, and he ditches Sorry and like goes away and stops interjecting with the humans. So there is like some conflict there that's foretold, and also I mentioned it earlier, but Croup and his dream prophecies are also a big part of this book. There's those scenes are also like Deck of Dragons adjacent, where he's like visiting with mysterious people, and they're just like saying things to him that end up being some sort of weird prophecy. And I think that whole um, that method of storytelling is really cool to me, because when you first read the prophecy, it doesn't make any sense at all. And then if you keep it back in your mind, you are rewarded for it in the end. If you just keep thinking about like what that prophecy might mean and try to apply it to the things that you're reading, you will eventually find things that do line up and make sense. So I think that's cool. So one thing that I still don't fully understand, and I don't know if this is like just lore that'll be explained in future books, um, or I'm not meant to understand it now, or maybe I'm dumb. I don't know. But I think like the one of the I mentioned in my book review that there's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina in the climax, and what I meant by that is the whole like Azeth house or Azath house or whatever. I think they call it a dead house, which is related to the second book, Dead House Gates. I think I'm not exactly sure how yet, but an Azath house grows out of nowhere and sort of captures the Jagged Tyrant and the Acorn. I forget what they call it, but the thing that the Jagged Tyrant was seeking. And I don't know how the Azath house works. I don't know why it just showed up or how it was able to like capture the tyrant. Um, it felt like it was just like a magical solution to like get rid of the tyrant because no one else was really like quite powerful enough. I don't even know if like I fully understand what happened in that section of the end of the book. Um, but because this is book one of 10 in this series, at least, I am hopeful that the climax, like this event will make more sense as I read more, and it's not really a Deus Ex Machina anymore, and it's more, the lore actually makes a little bit more sense. But in case anyone came from the book review and was wondering what I was talking about when I said that there was something confusing about the climax, this is exactly what I meant. And also, if you have a spoiler free way of explaining this, and it's not like totally something, if it's something I should have understood but just like missed, let me know in the comments below because I would love to actually maybe understand it. But maybe I'm not meant to know what an Azath house is yet, or like how it works. Um, and the last thing that I want to talk about, at least as far as these notes that I've written, um, is holy wars and the future. So in the back third of the book, it's mentioned that there's a holy war going on south of Darujistan, and that's basically making its way north and eventually going to conflict with the Malazan takeover of the Genabakis continent. We don't really learn much about that in this book. I don't know if this is going to be like, I don't know if we're going to return to this continent again in future books or not, but I am very interested in what this holy war is. I'm interested in like how the Dujek versus the Malazan Empire versus Brood versus this new like holy war army that's coming up from the south is going to conflict. And I'm wondering, like, Animander Rake and his, Moon Spawn are still, I think, just chilling. So I don't know if Rake is going to get involved in this stuff, or if like he's going to move Moon Spawn somewhere else and he's going to pop up somewhere else and like cause trouble. Um, but that's interesting to me. I think another future thing that I'm interested in is learning more about Cotillion and Amanus, the king of High House Shadow or whatever it was, because we do learn more about them throughout this book. And sort of at the end, Rake tells them to stop interfering with Sari, and they sort of like let her go. It's not clear at least like at the conclusion of the book whether or not Sari is like, or now renamed Apsalar, is back to normal, or if she's still kind of like, can she be taken over by Cotillion again? Like, what's Cotillion's body? Does he have an actual body, or does he just take over people? Because in the very beginning of the book, in chapter 1 or 2, before he took over Sari, he was a person, and then he took her over and was just like living as her. So what happened to his initial body? And like, is he now that body again, or does he take over somebody new? I don't really know like how that works. I don't know how he took her over in the first place. Was he just like mentally controlling her, but was like sitting in a room somewhere, or in his warren somewhere? I don't really know. I'm kind of curious. I think the way that the gods and these ascendants are able to interfere with the world is interesting to me. The word ascendant is also mentioned. I probably should have written this down, but at this point, I'm at the end of my notes, so I'm just thinking of things off the top of my head. The word ascendant is mentioned a bunch of times in this book. It's mentioned in like the glossary, and also gods are mentioned. I don't really fully know the difference between a god and an ascendant at this point still. I would guess that gods are more powerful than ascendants, but like, how does one ascend? How does somebody become an ascendant? Like, where do the ascendants live and go? Like, do they live in their warrens? Do they always affect the world? It there was a passage somewhere in this book that mentions that the High House Shadow kind of came back after being dormant for thousands of years or hundreds of years, and Amanus and Cotillion came back, or were, sort of came out of nowhere 9 years ago, which is when the prologue took place. Um, I actually now know from book 2 why that happened. I don't want to mention it here just because that's a spoiler for the second book, and I thought it was a cool reveal. But the fact that the High House Shadow came out of nowhere again, or like came out of having gone away, still is like, doesn't really make any sense to me. I don't really know how that works. Are there other houses that are dormant that are going to suddenly get ascendance and then become a thing in the world again? Maybe, maybe not. Like, if there's nobody from High House Shadow for thousands of years, then how does one ascend to High House Shadow? Um, that part of the magic system is still very not explored in this book. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that as well. So at this point, if you've gotten this far in the video, it's now dark outside. I reached the end of the notes that I wrote. I could probably keep talking about this for another half an hour. There's like more random things that I keep thinking about as I'm reflecting on this book and as I'm reading book two as well. Um, and I honestly just keep coming up with more and more questions that I have, which is very exciting because I still have 8.5 books in this series to go. I know that there's a bunch of other side series or series that are part of this world and but not directly part of the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. So I don't know if I'm going to read all those eventually, but I do at least plan on reading these 10 books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I'm definitely hooked after book one. Book two's been super interesting so far. I plan on continuing to read it actually tonight. And if you guys are enjoying the series so far, or if you guys have already read the series and you enjoy it, let me know in the comments below. If there's anything obvious that I missed from this book, and I mentioned it in this video, also let me know. I would love to. I'd love to be explained things if I missed them. I don't want to know about like any spoilers of things that happen in the future books because I'll reach those eventually. I think there's a lot of questions that I have to assume are going to be answered in the future, or going to be explored more in the future. But if there's like things that I was supposed to see and find out in this book that I just like clearly missed, definitely let me know because I would like to know those things or reread those sections so that I can like understand them again. It has been a few weeks it's probably been 3 weeks, I think, since I finished this book. So not everything is super fresh in my brain, but I've been continuing in the Malazan universe. So like I think the questions that I have are still mostly relevant, but there's so many small and large prophecies and all that stuff throughout this book that it's kind of hard to piece together and like fully understand everything. But anyways, if you like the video, let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe, blah blah blah, and I'll see you next time.